the truth is that running any business is hard. Running a hardware business in the bleeding edge in healthcare during COVID is probably one of the hardest things you could do, right? You still got shareholders, you still got you still got targets to hit, and we'd always be behind. Technology always takes you twice as long and costs you twice as much as you think, and nothing's straightforward. We were working at the highest levels with the National Physics Laboratory, for example. With the blood sensor, we were building a non-invasive blood analysis device, which is one of the hardest things to do. And many hundreds of millions, billions of dollars has gone into trying to build those. We hear about it. It's going to come on the Apple Watch. I've been hearing that since I left that business, which was nearly 7 years ago.
What if a single $20 book could change not just your business, but your life? For entrepreneur Dan Honeywell, Play Bigger did just that. It reframed how he built companies, from chasing markets to designing categories, and set him on a journey that led to a £120 million healthcare venture. But years later, the real transformation came not in the boardroom, but in a therapist's office. In this conversation, Dan shares how mentorship, vulnerability, and hard-earned introspection reshaped his definition of success, from financial growth to personal freedom, from building a category-defining company to rebuilding himself. This episode dives into the art of leading, learning, and letting go. Stay tuned. This one begins with a book, but ends in a transformation. Dan, welcome to the One Away Show.
Hey Brian, how you doing, man? Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. It's great to have a second conversation. Really enjoyed our first, and looking forward to diving in. So, Dan, what is the one away moment that you want to share with us today?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, right? Because this is the only bit of information you gave me before the podcast, or this conversation, which I love, right? And I've been thinking about it a lot. And it really goes back to when I founded one of my previous companies. We can go into it in a bit more detail. And somebody recommended this book to me called Play Bigger. And it was my Bible. I've got a well-thumbed version with notes all through the margins. And it really shifted my thinking away from building a business to thinking about the category that you want to design and play in and ultimately own, right, as your business. And that was a thing that was really, really opened my eyes, because before that, I'd studied business at university. I'd actually advised businesses from a consulting perspective for many, many years. And, lots of tactical leadership transformation programs, all the sort of cliches that you hear every day. And this was the first time that I opened this book and read and realized that actually we can do so much more than just trying to make incremental improvements. And it was maybe a sort of obvious statement, but to me, it was certainly non-obvious at the time. And it was utterly transformational in the sense that when I first founded the business, we had no money, right? I could afford to buy a $20 book or £20 book in my case in London off Amazon. And the practicalities that gave me to really think about how you build a magnetic vision and how you write your point of view and define the problem that you're trying to solve in the world, really focusing on the why as opposed to the what and the how that comes later, was pretty transformational.
Yeah, that's amazing. What, on this note, Dan, like you mentioned, when you started the business, you read the book, it shifted your perspective. When you kind of look back at that moment, do you think that you were playing small, or you just didn't have like the perspective to look at things, how to create a much larger impact?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was one of those situations, right? And I have to sort of take you back a little bit to give the context. So I'm somebody that's always been insanely curious. I studied Mandarin and business at university. Before that, I became a scuba diving instructor, and I moved around the world and loved to learn. My father instilled that in me. My love of travel and my love of being ultimately insanely curious. And I came out of university and I started a consultancy business ultimately. And I ended up that was doing pretty well, and we ended up growing and franchising around the world. But quite honestly, I got bored, and I decided I wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to go build a tech business. That was all the rage. Well, I had no idea what building a tech business really meant, right? I managed to meet an incredible co-founder of mine. He was a brilliant physicist, but with his own ambition, couldn't manage his way out of a paper bag. And we therefore formed a great team because he was fantastic on the technology side, and I was this young, brave, naive, arrogant, whatever you want to call it. I just thought I could take on the world. But very quickly when you do that, as anybody who started a company knows, you get massively caught up in the detail, right? I mean, everything. I was writing the contracts. I was negotiating the office lease. I was raising the money. I was doing literally everything. And so you very quickly get caught up in the sort of blinkered trajectory, or caught in the furrow of business plans and board meetings and all that sort of thing. And actually, the whole concept of category design is really stopping to think about exactly what the problem is that exists in the world today, right? So that's a very obvious statement. But if you think about the category defining companies, you just have to check your credit card statement to check if they're a category defining business or not, right? They're all over your credit card statements, the Netflixes, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the Limes, you can just find them on your credit card. What they do is they realize that there is a shift in context that happens in the world. So in our case, we were firm believers that the world of healthcare, we were in the healthcare domain. We've been told that the change in healthcare was coming for many, many years. Really, nothing was really changing. And the problem was that this was before Apple Watches and smart devices and so on and so forth. The only data you could get was a moment in time, and it was backward looking. And we fundamentally believed the shift was coming with low cost electronics, powered by technologies like the one that we had available to us, that would give you proactive insights around blood markers and all kinds of other things, and therefore we'd be able to turn the healthcare system from reactive to proactive. Right, bold statement. And we believe that's where the market should go, and there's many components to that. Now, when you start talking in those terms, the magnetism that creates is phenomenal for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's very easy to you want to be better, right? By nature, as human beings, we're always told just be a bit better, right? Incremental improvement. And actually being different is pretty scary, right? If you're different at school, you stand out. If you're different in business, you leave the safe harbor of the things that you know. And it takes quite a lot of courage actually to truly decide that you want to do things differently. But what that does is that I found that comparison is a sort of thief of, in the business world, is a bit of a thief of joy and a thief of innovation. And it really constrains you within these sort of square walls. And as a result of me in the early stages, we'll come on to the later stages, I just read the book and I wrote what we call the point of view, which is this is what we think the problem is in the world. This is why we want to solve it. And this is how we're going to go about doing it. And I ended up attracting people to the business that I couldn't believe. Right? I'll give you an example. So it was me and my co-founder, a couple of other people in the mix. And I realized that I needed a chair. I needed somebody who's the elder statesman. We had the mad inventor. We had the business guy who was leading it. We needed somebody to back it. And I went and applied this point of view with somebody who was called Sir Charles Masefield, right? He was a knight of the realm. He was the president of BAE Systems. He was the Minister of Export for the UK, way outside my sort of realm of who I thought I could get. But I thought, fuck it, let's try. And he joined us, right? He put his money in, he joined us. He said, hey, nobody can disagree with this thesis, right? Of course we've got to fix this problem. It's a massive problem that exists. And therein started the sort of the momentum forwards towards that vision. And the other thing that it did was it meant that every single part of the business fed off that point of view, right? The hiring protocols, who we wanted, the kind of aptitude that we wanted them to have, the attitude we wanted them to bring, the tech roadmap, the communication style, the PR, everything fell out of that. So it was a sort of North Star piece of paper that was our constitution. We all knew it. And when I got to final interviews, I was asking people about the why, not about whether or not they had the capability, because that was already covered by the rest of the team, right? So that's a long answer to a simple question.
No, I really appreciate how you shared how it shifted, your perspective, and how, I think the book it matured you and kind of how you thought about every process and every aspect of your business so that you could ultimately, yes, achieve the North Star, or at least work towards the North Star in every dimension of what you were doing, because you had maybe a greater vision built out that could be category defining. Is that fair to say?
Totally fair to say. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Amazing. And it sounds like even today, it's still left a big impact on you, because we're still talking about it. So that's super cool. What was the result? Tell us about that business, what it did, kind of where you, how far you took it under that North Star.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a really interesting, totally different world to now, right? We're talking 2011, 12 when I founded that business. Just completely different capital environment. It was grow at all costs, right? Interest rates were on the floor. And actually, compared to today, raising capital was fairly straightforward. I didn't feel it at the time, but it was fairly straightforward. We didn't have to think about words like profit and revenue, right? That was like, yeah, worry about that later when you get down the line. And it was just a very different world, and I was lucky to be in that world. And we actually, if I'm really honest, we had a solution that was looking for a problem. We had an amazing device, and I'll never forget the day that I went down to meet my who came to be my co-founder. Amazing guy, looked like Einstein. Shock of white hair, the wireframe glasses. He had this sensor on the table. And he said, he had all these little bags on the table. We might recognize them from our university days as little, baggies. And he had all these different substances in them, all legal. And I put one on the sensor, and it said, one said olive oil, then it said salt, sugar, whatever, with an image that came up on the screen. And I thought, wow, that's really clever. That's an amazing technology. If what you're telling me is that you can quantify materials non-invasively and reliably, that's a world-changing technology. But we didn't know where it was going to go, if I'm totally honest with you. And in fact, we ended up in all kinds of different areas. We were looking at, automotive applications, security applications, healthcare applications. We did things with the Ministry of Defense. We did a whole bunch of different things. And I had to learn very, very fast that actually I couldn't know everything. I had to be the dumbest person in the room. Again, that's another cliche, but again, just due to my curiosity, I would love to be that person in there and just, assemble a great team of people to solve problems. And so what ended up happening is we'd make progress on either on an application or we wouldn't. And it was a real sort of R&D house, right? We were literally designing the sensors, writing the firmware, the software, every single part of that process we were doing pretty much in-house and with some suppliers. And ultimately, we became, fairly large, right? We ended up growing to £120 million valuation approximately, and we were growing really, really, really fast. And what ended up happening was, over time, we realized that in order to get through to commercial return, it was going to take a much longer. It was going to take 10 to 15 years because we ended up focusing on the oncology diagnostic device. And so that was an amazing journey. I left that business, I think it was in 2021, and along the way, it was just incredible. I mean, so I remember going back to that book from Play Bigger. Eventually, after I raised some capital, or a couple of rounds in, I was able to afford to pay for the team that wrote the book to come and help us define this category in a bit more detail. And so Kevin Maney, if you got anybody who's listening to this goes and buys the book, Kevin's the first name on there. He's the guy that wrote the words. And I had John Scully was also involved at that point, who, as you may know, is the former CEO of Apple and Pepsi and is the absolute force. In fact, I was talking to him today, and I was also talking to Kevin today, incidentally. And we had this incredible session. It was during COVID, so it was all on Zoom, where I brought everybody in my team, and the question they asked me was, who would you bring into the room if you had to make a critical business decision, including closing the company down? Right, it really focuses the mind. It doesn't necessarily have to be exec, but who would you want around you to make those decisions? And so John was involved in that. I had a whole bunch of people involved. And that was an incredible learning opportunity as well for me, because, of course, John is the ultimate marketeer, right? And he always used to say to me, Dan, perception leads reality. And, you got to put it out there, and then, you bit of vaporware, you put it out there and you race to catch up. And that was an interesting dynamic with the tech team as well, right? You have one person out there selling the solution, and they're running like crazy behind trying to provide it, which was a very deliberate decision that we took at the time. And then Kevin ended up sitting on my advisory board along with John, and yeah, it was just an incredible journey. So the company's still going. It's still progressing with the oncology diagnostic technology, and I'm very proud of my part in it. And I think I stepped away at the right time.
Yeah. Well, seems like you had some amazing people around you, and we continue to have some amazing people around you. But also that, it sounds like you were brave enough as well to put people around you to kind of ask the hard questions with the team around you and kind of say, I don't have all the answers, which is a testament to, I think, your leadership as well. I mean, what, when you kind of held that session, where things, when you had those questions posed, were things at a, were they at the point where maybe you didn't know like what to do when you talked about those COVID sessions, and it was kind of like, okay, I got to bring some people around me. Like what led to those conversations?
It's a really good question, and the truth is that running any business is hard. Running a hardware business in the bleeding edge in healthcare during COVID is probably one of the hardest things you could do. Right? You still got shareholders, you still got you still got targets to hit, and we'd always be behind. Technology has always taken you twice as long and cost you twice as much as you think, and nothing straightforward. We were working at the highest levels with the National Physics Laboratory, for example, with the blood sensor. We were building a non-invasive blood analysis device, which is one of the hardest things to do. And many hundreds of millions, billions of dollars has gone into trying to build those. We hear about it. It's going to come on the Apple Watch. I've been hearing that since I left that business, which was nearly 7 years ago. So it's a really, really, really hard thing to do. And we had a cab company on standby that was literally taking hardware from one hardware engineer's house to the next, and we were like shipping them around the country on a continuous basis, still trying to hack things together. It's amazing what you can do in a crisis, right? It's just incredible what you can actually achieve. But the reality is that was it was a very hard business to run. Lots of dynamics in there. I'd never done it before. Obviously, I made a ton of mistakes. I would definitely have changed the way that I did things if I go back. But that's the beauty of learning, right? And I just realized that we needed to be super clear on that category, and we needed to not to go into too much detail, but we needed to restructure. And the only way to do that when you got at the board level and senior management level is to get everybody to vehemently agree on the direction of travel, right? That's the first thing you have to do. If you try and shift people around just based off an opinion, because hey, I'm the CEO, right? You need to move. What's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to say no. You're not going. I mean, most people were all fully capable, and they were all great people and with great backgrounds and everything else. But ultimately, you have to bring people, in my view, to a position of making a decision that they either agree with, or at best that they are part of, and then they will willingly step down or step aside or move or shift or whatever it might be in order for the greater good of the vision of the category, of the world, and ultimately of the business, right? And so that was what I was really trying to do. And it was broadly, it was broadly very successful in its own right in that, in that little instance. But coming beyond that, so once I left that business, and vulnerably, that was a very, very hard time for me. I won't go into the details, but it was incredibly difficult. And it was just before that John Scully, I was at his house actually. My wife was heavily pregnant. We were both at his house, and I said, John, look, I'm feeling like I'm stuck, right? Like I'm running this business. I'm flying all over the world. I'm traveling like crazy. I'm doing all these amazing things. But I'm just like, I need more. Should I do an MBA? What should I do? And he said, YPO. No, didn't even hesitate. I was like, what's YPO? Anyway, YPO is an organization for people like you that are struggling with these kind of issues. That I wish it was around when I was a young CEO. Go join it. And I didn't have time to think about it actually beyond that. And then eventually somebody invited me to join. And the reason I go off at this tangent is because what I've realized since is, and one of my strengths now is the power of being vulnerable, not just with those in your private life, but being vulnerable with those around you to a point, right, in business, and be able to talk vulnerably about, we have this veneer, right, with the veneer of success. We all want to present this vision of ourselves, which is successful. We've all got shit. I mean, that's the thing that YPO taught me. For those of you that don't know what YPO is, it's an organization that consists of CEOs who have run a business of a certain size, employee revenue and valuation by the age of 45. And the whole idea is that it's a very, very hard thing to do. And we have peer-to-peer support and all sorts of things that goes along with that. And it's just taught me that being vulnerable with those around you and finding strength in that vulnerability is the most powerful thing we can do as business leaders. Because if we look into those difficult places and we start to identify why we act in the way that we act, or they acted in the way that we act, be that health, wealth, family, or business, there's a massive amount of strength within that. And I make no hesitation to tell everybody that I'm a massive believer in therapy, a massive believer in self-improvement and affirmations, and in just speaking to everybody openly and honestly about the things that are on your mind. And I think a lot of people, it's very scary, but actually I've applied that in my later business ventures, and it's paid absolute dividends. So again, massive tangent, but it led me through a whole world of exploration. Actually, that one book, that one Amazon delivery has sort of tumbled me through very dark places, very happy places, and everything in between, So happy to go wherever you think we should go next.
Yeah. So, I mean, first, I think it takes a lot of, my mom, I'll give her a little shout. She always taught me growing up, it's okay to ask for help. And I didn't realize that that's not the norm. I just thought that was the norm. And I think what I'm hearing you say is, like, when you were at John's house, you said to him, you were open, you were vulnerable in the sense of what you were looking for counsel. And that counsel, you heard it once, you heard it again, you followed counsel, and that opened you up. I guess, one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, and I really loved our first chat. Like, I felt like it was very, like, connective, like it was like very, you just felt like a human. Pre-YPO and like pre-making yourself vulnerable in these shared professional experiences, did you have that muscle, or was it maybe hiding in disguise, and a YPO was like the catalyst to like unleash this like more open and human side? Like who is Daniel pre-YPO? Who's Daniel post-YPO? If that makes sense.
It's a deep question, man. Look, here's the truth. I ended up studying, I think I mentioned studying Mandarin, right? And as part of that journey, I went to Taipei, right? The reason I went to Taipei was because I failed my first year, and they gave me a chance to retake my exams over the summer. And they said, if you retake your exams, you can go on your year abroad, which was the second year, which is what I really wanted to do, if I'm honest, right? That was the reason I was doing it, to go spend the year in a faraway land and, just live that life. So I studied my ass off. I passed my exams, and I had a choice. It was, look, you can either go to China or you can go to Taipei. Nobody else went to Taipei. I was the only one in my whole course went to Taipei. The reason I did it is because I wanted to, I knew if I went with my friends, I'd speak English, I'd live in a house with them, I'd hang out with them, and I wouldn't progress, right? So now what was that? Was that innate within? If I'm honest, that was driven by fear, right? That was not like a wise decision. It was a shit. If I go there, I'm not, I'm going to fail my degree. So I'm going to go over here. And I distinctly remember getting in the taxi from the airport to my accommodation in the city. And like literally, I'm not kidding. I couldn't string a sentence together. I passed my exam somehow, right, through just pure pig-headed brute force. But I couldn't string a sentence together. And you get pretty humble pretty quickly, right? When you're in a city, don't forget there was no smartphones, there was no Google Maps, there was no nothing. I had a Chinese to English dictionary that was like this big that I used to carry around with me everywhere underneath my arm. And you had to ask for help, right? Like there was no other way. I mean, if I wanted to eat, I had to make a mistake out of myself. I had to make a fool out of myself. I had to make the noise of a cow, and then I had to, hope that they'd bring me something edible. But slowly but surely, you learn that. I learned a couple of things. One thing is I learned that 99% of people are good people. They will help you if you ask for it. They will. They absolutely will. And I apply this to every single scenario I've ever been in business or in life. Generally, they will help you, and people are by far and wide a million miles away from what you see on the media, right? Generally, but that's a really vulnerable place to be. And I remember living in Taipei, and I was surrounded for the first time, really in many, many years, by millions of people, but I felt incredibly lonely. Right. And I remember just walking back to my dorm room thinking, what the fuck have I done here? Right. Up this massive hill in the sweltering heat. But you get through it, and slowly but surely I've started to recognize faces, words. I remember sitting on the bus and I had my dictionary and I worked out, what the exit sign meant and why it meant that. And I never forget, I can still see the characters in my mind. And you begin to build a confidence base. And I guess if I'm really honest, that taught me more than anything in language or in the sort of business studies side of things. It taught me that if I can do that, if I can land in a foreign country and go from being bottom 1% of the class to being easily top 2% when I got back, fluent reading, writing, speaking, listening, right? Friends, then I could pretty much do anything. And I guess that gave me a confidence, maybe an arrogance that was helpful in some ways and less helpful in other ways, that drove me forwards. And then the next point where I felt I had a real one-away moment was when I was at Wimbledon. I was actually at Wimbledon with a client, and I was watching Djokovic play Anderson on number 2 court. And I happened to be sitting behind Djokovic's sort of, area where his team sits. There's about 15 people in this box. And I was like, they're not all his family, right? He's got a nutritionist, he's got a dietitian, he's got a coach, he's got a sub-coach, he's got a sub-sub-coach, he's got a psychiatrist, he's got a lifestyle design, he's got everything. And at that point, I was fast forwarded. I was far away from Taipei. I was running my business and it was all going well. And I was speaking around the world and it was, all wonderful. But underneath, I was really struggling. Right? Like people, I felt responsible for people's mortgages and their kids' holidays and their, I had a weight of this responsibility on my shoulders that, I was expected to deliver, not just for them, for the shareholders, right? I had some billionaires in there. I had some venture capital in there. I had friends. I had family. The pressure of that was really killing me, actually, if I'm honest, right? On the outside, I was fine. On the inside, I was really struggling, right? Addiction and, drinking too much and all this sort of thing, right? Just to try and dull the pain. And I remember looking and thinking, we are trying to play our own Wimbledon every single day. We're trying to get up and we're trying to win on those incremental gains, right? I think Federer says he won 51.7% of his points over his career. That's the difference between success and failure, championship and, lifting the cup and not, right? We're trying to do that every single day, day in, day out. And yet we're expected to do it pretty much alone. I don't mean broadly alone. Of course, you've got boards and so on and so forth, but pretty much, right? And it's very taboo to go and get therapy or, look, introspect and all that. At least in my world it was. But I did. I went, and the next day I remember I called up a friend of mine who was a very good friend, and he was a conflict reporter in war zones at the time, and I knew he'd had some therapy for PTSD. And I said, "Hey, man, I think I need some help." And he gave me the name of a guy. Get emotional thinking about it. He gave me the name of this guy. I remember walking through that door, and the stigma, right? What the fuck am I doing? Well, I'm going to sit on a therapist's couch. Like, what the hell? It's not the same as the US over here. We're very reserved people, you understand. We solve things with cups of tea and strongly worded letters. But I sat on that couch and I remember after a couple of sessions, I was like, "So when are you going to when are you going to therapize me? Like when are you going to what's going on here?" And he was like, "Dude, just go with the process, stick through it." And it was transformational actually, and it was probably life saving in more ways than one, if I'm really honest. And that's another thing that I think we don't talk about enough. People are starting to talk about it more, but I think everyone loves to see the Instagram lifestyle. The post the reels of what's going good in their life. But actually, I've found through my experience that almost the more successful somebody is outwardly, the more is going on inside, right? And the more support and guidance that they might need beyond what the external shows. So again, massively meandering story to answer your question, but I hope that was a little bit insightful.
Yeah, I mean, look, I resonate with all of it in many ways, some of it more than others. So, I mean, one, I think you're right. The Taipei story, just to start, I mean, it seems like you've had, I think growth's interesting because you kind of have to put yourself in like situations that are going to force you to grow. And you've done that with business. You did that in Taipei. You did it in YPO. You did it in therapy. Like you've kind of like self-induced growth, and it's kind of painful going through it. And clearly, one, you've charted forward right through that pain, and like come out a more holistic and more dynamic person. So one, that's really interesting. And then two, I think especially for men in business, men in London who use 4-letter words and cups of tea, I mean, that's a whole nother dynamic. So it seems like you're, for you, that it was foreign. Obviously in the US, I think therapy is maybe a little more further along, but I think it's still taboo.
We're getting there. We're definitely getting there. We tend to lag you by a couple of election cycles, right? But we're getting there.
You follow our innovation, it's just, come on. I think it says a lot about you, right? It's kind of stepping into your own kind of personal gym or mental gym and, heart space to unfold and untether. If you're a founder looking to grow without raising capital or giving up control, Relent is built for you. Founded by entrepreneurs who've scaled without outside funding, Relent helps companies find and retain talent, lower operational costs, and reinvest in growth. We've hired nearly 10 team members through Relent and streamlined our entire cost structure, freeing up capital to put toward what matters most. Even small teams can set up offshore operations quickly, compliantly, and without heavy infrastructure. With deep expertise in the India-US corridor, Relent combines cultural fluency with operational rigor and guides everything from team design to long-term scaling. Grow on your terms and start with Relent. To learn more, visit relent.team/arcbound. If you don't mind me asking, you see you get all these pressure and expectations of board people, investors, this, and totally get it. What were you the most scared of?
Failure, for sure. And if I'm really honest, and I've thought about this a lot, it's the feeling of being worthy or not having, not being worthy of the success is almost like the antithesis of the fear of failure. And I've pushed myself out of my comfort zone my whole life, as I've just described to you. I'll give you many more examples, and I think I really try and reframe fear into excitement for a growth opportunity, right? Like fear, where does that come from? And if you really look into it carefully, it's a really interesting place to start exploring. And often if you can reframe fear, it can give you a huge opportunity. And I remember a friend of mine, Alex Icon, who's a wonderful human being, who founded the gratitude journaling movement, which I'm immeasurably grateful to him for. He says, look, when I get a challenge, I pause and I think, what a gift. Because within every challenge, there's an opportunity. But if I'm truly honest, I was way outside my comfort zone. I mean, way beyond anything. I've jumped out of planes. I've done all kinds of amazing stuff. But it was the multitude of the dynamics that was overwhelming. It was totally overwhelming, and the conflicting opinions. Right, this is another thing. I had an amazing board, amazing advisory board. But the challenge, of course, is that you ask 5 people an opinion, you get 10 different answers, right? And how do you deal with that? You're always going to disappoint somebody. And, and where does that come from? Where does my fear of disappointing people come from? Well, then I go back to my childhood, and my mother is very religious. My father is totally atheist. My father's very conservative. My mother's very liberal. My father drinks alcohol. My mother's teetotal. Right? We can go on and on and on. And so how do you chart a path through that? I mean, first of all, how are they still together? And how if they had 7 kids? Maybe that's why they're still together. But they're very much in love. But, my God, the opposites, they're like the absolute prime example of opposites attracting, I suppose. But, imagine that dynamic as a kid, right? Like, do I go to church? Do I not? Like, whatever I do, I'm going to disappoint somebody. So I've always had this sort of, I didn't know it at the time, by the way, right? This comes through many, many years of therapy and introspection and so on and so forth. But fear of disappointing, right? I wanted to deliver. I wanted to deliver for myself. I wanted to deliver for the world. I wanted to deliver for those that believed in me. I wanted to deliver for those that put the capital in me, or the capital into the business, I should say. And and those dynamics, the pressures are real, and they're real in any business, but certainly in a company. The risks were always well described. Everybody knew this was a massive bet. It was either going to go massive or it was probably not going to go very much at all. Fully understood, right? And some things worked, some things didn't. The glucose monitor, for example, I described, ended up ultimately not being viable. And the oncology diagnostic tool was viable. So, all these things are, when I talk about them now as memories, are easy to say, but, you imagine that pressure. And I never forget, we hired a guy, an engineer, and my co-founder again, Hirand, he was a wonderful engineer, but, if I had to fire someone, he would literally run away. I mean, literally run away. If Dan, you handle that, right? I had to fire this poor guy, and he said, "But Dan, I've just bought a house, right? I'm about to get married. You firing me?" And I had to sit there, and I still think about it today, right? I had to look this poor kid in the face. He was a bright guy from Oxford, and he was a wonderful human being, and I had to deliver that message. That's tough, right? And I didn't like doing that, and letting people down in that way was really, really difficult. But it is life. Ultimately, it is life. And the other thing that I found very difficult is that when you grow to a certain size, you can tick along at 10, 20, 30 million valuation. Nobody really notices, right? When you start to get up into the 9 figures and, up to that level, it starts to make it worth people's while to be, how do I put it? More self-oriented than, world-oriented. And I made a lot of mistakes, man. I remember one of my early investors called me and he said, "Dan, you got to be careful because, you got to watch out. You make sure your contracts are tight, make sure everything's fine." I was like, "Oh, that's all right, man. Everything's going to be okay. Most people are good people. It'll all work out." And that trust thing that I've built up from my time traveling around the world, everyone's great, was tested, severely tested, actually, to an extreme degree. And, what I've learned over time is that how we define success and failure is we got to really think about that, right? Because if you look at my bank balance, you probably wouldn't think I was as successful as most people that are, certainly in my peer group. But I've made conscious decisions to spend time every day, every possible day that I can with my son, to spend that time with him, to laugh with him, to love him, and to nurture him, and for him to do the same with me. Because that's wealth to me. That is a wealth that I think that my father, he provided for us brilliantly, but he definitely sacrificed that side of things, and I think he would go back and change that if he could. Control of my diary, right? So being able to make decisions about where I am and what I do and how I do it is a wealth that is not available to other people in my peer group who are running public companies and who get paid, millions upon millions of pounds or dollars a year. But the diaries are set 6 months out, right? For me personally, that just doesn't work. And the ability to work with people that I want to work with and that want to work with me is a wealth that I hold very dear. And in my new business that I've just launched, which I'd love to talk about another time if we're running out of time, but that is absolutely central. I've literally written it in, and I've told everybody. I've told the investors, I've told the team, I've told every single person, this is how it's going to be. And if you don't feel like it's right for you at any point, no hard feelings, walk out the door. Because this has to be, if we're going to achieve what we're trying to achieve, we have to have that ability to enjoy working together. It doesn't always mean we don't argue, we don't have tension, right? It just means that we look forward. And when we leave those debates, we leave feeling of 10 feet tall, and we leave feeling that we can take on the world. Because I've had both sides. I had an amazing chairman who did that to me every single day, and we had stand-up arguments. Ultimately, he always backed me, regardless of whatever the decision was. He backed me 100% in front of the team and in front of everybody else. And I've had the exact opposite, when actually it's all about how do I make myself look big and make you look small. And that just kills everything, kills culture, kills the business, kills everything. So, I define success differently than perhaps the sort of obvious one, which is, well, how much money do you have? How many, what's your capital portfolio? I actually look and say, how much time do I have for me? How much time do I have for my family? And how in control am I of my destiny in the future?
Yeah, I would love to continue. I do have a financial meeting. Unfortunately, yeah.
Of course.
I started late because of another meeting, so that's on me and my own. Maybe not as being in control of my diary as I would like. So thanks for leaving me with that, Dan. This was a joy. Where can people find you, reach out to you, get to know you? I'd love to talk about your company another time. I'm sorry we didn't get to finish on what you're doing now.
Absolutely, man. I'll send you my details. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, Dan Honeywell. Reach out to me on email, dan@wearenaya.com, or my personal is danielhoneywell@me.com. I'll send you the details. Would love to hear from you. And thank you, Brian. I didn't know what I was going to say. And you just, I don't know if that's useful or helpful or not, but it was a pleasure.
It was amazing. It was you. It was perfect. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Today, Dan reminded us that transformation rarely looks like success from the outside. It starts quietly, with a question, a breakdown, or a book that changes how we see the world. He showed us that leadership is less about control and more about courage. To ask for help, to face your fears, and to define wealth on your own terms. From category design to personal design, his story bridges strategy and soul. If this episode moved you, share it with someone building something big or rebuilding themselves. And remember, new episodes of The One Away Show drop every Tuesday and Friday. Keep listening and keep growing.